been live on Airbnb for almost 4, if you can believe that. But a lot has changed about the Airbnb landscape in this time, and it's making a pretty different amount than it did a few years ago. So I want to share today how things have changed and if Airbnb is more or less worth doing today. If you've been following the journey, you know that at first it lost a bit of money, then it started to make money, but I always thought that over time it would become easier to earn more. I had a hypothesis the whole time that over time, nightly rents would go up with inflation. Everything gets more expensive over time. Our expenses would hopefully stay about the same, maybe raise a little bit, but just the way that your rent and food and airfare, everything has gone up in price, I thought that, nightly rates would also go up in price. I figured since the main expense being the mortgage is locked in and the nightly rates would slowly go up, it would become more profitable over time. And today we can see whether or not that started to happen. But before we get into it, I want to thank Belkin for sponsoring this video because I actually added one of their products to my Airbnb. This is their 25-watt wireless charger. It charges your phone, your watch, and your AirPods all at the same time. I love it because it looks beautiful. You don't have to have multiple cords to charge everything for the next morning. And for a wireless charger, it's actually quite fast. It's 5 times faster than other wireless chargers. So you're getting the speed really of a wired charger without all the clutter. They also have a travel version, which is super cool because it folds down to be pretty small, but when you unfold it, you can still charge everything, your phone, watch, and AirPods. Super easy. Again, now you don't have to travel with multiple different charging cords. Here's a little size comparison for you. I love this one at home because it looks so good on your nightstand, but if you travel a lot, this one's great because you can fold it up and just throw it in your bag and get going. I love Belkin products in general. They're very high quality. If you've never tried them, I think you'll be impressed with the build quality and the aesthetic of it. Thank you to Belkin for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into the state of Airbnb today. So if you're new to my Airbnb, let's quickly go over the numbers. As a lot of you already know, but if you don't, I'll sum it up pretty quick. The house was purchased for $750,000. We had to put between $150,000 to $200,000 into renovations. Between the amount we put down and the amount that we put into renovating, it was probably around $400,000. Looking back, could you do things for cheaper? Yeah, I'm sure that you could, but also it was at a time where everyone was renovating, so even the prices of renovations were a bit inflated. So it is a significant amount that we had to put down in cash. And to be honest, back then, I wasn't thinking about this in terms of an investment. I was not comparing it to what I would get had I put that money in the stock market instead. It was really more of, we want a house we can use in Palm Springs and hopefully we can make some money off of it too. So even from the start, I wasn't quite looking at it from the cash on cash return standpoint. So the first year, it actually made quite a lot in revenue, but the expenses were so high that we did not make a profit. Then the next year, we actually did make a profit of about $7,000, though I'm sure this will all just eventually go to maintenance. But the reason we profited was not because the rents were higher, it was because the expenses were lower. We charged the proper amount for pool heat, and we didn't have any crazy major repairs like we did the previous year. So let's talk about that nightly rent and what it's looking like. Has it gotten higher? No. Actually, they've gone down, and I think there's an explanation for it. We can see that in the past years, by this time, sort of end of September, we would have made around $55,000 so far. That was kind of the average for this time of year. So far this year, from January to September, it's actually only made $38,000. We can see that the winter and early spring is still very strong. I mean, you just look at that and it looks like the house is doing great. It's making what, $8,000, $9,000, then $7,000 a month. And then really an extreme drop off in May, when the previous years, we still made a pretty good amount, probably about $3,000 a month, May and June. But this May, it was $1,000, $600 in June, $1,600 in July, just really not enough to cover the expenses. And even though these winter months sound good, 8,000, 9,000, 7,000, they actually, when you look at it, still weren't quite as much as the previous years. I mean, it really varies, but in 2023, there was a month it made 14,000. So my hypothesis that nightly rents would be a little bit higher was not correct so far. Although it is still pretty early, I wouldn't really expect within 4 years the nightly rates to double or anything like that, but I certainly didn't expect them to go down. And actually, when I looked into it, the rate of inflation for travel travel lodging is pretty low. It's usually about 2% a year. Meanwhile, the rate of inflation for everything else has been a lot higher in recent years. Housing has been closer to 4% per year. Even things like eggs have been closer to 5% per year. But even that 2% inflation rate for travel lodging, we haven't even seen that. And the thing is, the nightly rates that we got when we first launched were actually pretty unusual. So during COVID and really all of 2022, everyone was seeing inflated nightly rents that they wouldn't have seen the previous years. The thing is, when we put the house live in 2022, it was skewed from what I call the COVID effect. Airbnbs were doing amazing during COVID, partially because of work from home. People were taking these workcations. They would come and stay at this house for 5 days, just like randomly. Now with people returning to office, it's not really possible for as many people to do that. So there's overall less demand now than there was in 2022. Our average price back then was $700 a night. Whereas now, if you're listing at $700 a night, you're not really gonna get that. Our average now during the peak season, I would say, is closer to $600, and during the off season would be $400. So nightly rents are significantly lower. What we can really learn from this is Airbnb nightly rents do not track with the rest of inflation that we're seeing because it's a luxury, not a necessity. In fact, there's actually an opposite effect. As everything else has inflated and gotten more expensive, people of course have less money to spend on luxuries like a vacation, clothing. If you look at the stats, people are not spending quite as much on travel this year, myself included. I even like a month ago told myself no more trips the rest of the year because that is when I spend the most money. And my property manager confirmed that this is across the board. It's not just our Airbnb, but all the ones that are a similar price to ours are seeing a lot less bookings this year. But the ultra high-end Airbnbs are actually doing really well, interestingly. The thing is, these really high-end Airbnbs have a very different clientele that aren't as concerned about the job market. It's people with a lot more money. They're not worried about inflation. They have a lot of assets usually. In fact, inflation probably benefits them more than anything. The middle tier Airbnbs like mine are booked by people who are much more affected by this kind of thing. There was a 2025 survey that found that Americans are spending on average 25% less on everything from dining out to vacations. It's not because the vacations have gotten more expensive. It's because of higher cost of living, macroeconomic concerns, and overall inflation. The job market hasn't been super optimistic either, which certainly doesn't help. And the overall sentiment about it is pretty pessimistic, which also kind of reinforces and makes people more afraid to spend their money on things they don't need because of fears of if they lose their job, it could be a lot harder to get a different one. Whereas in 2022, people were getting bonuses to job hop somewhere else. It's just a very different economic environment. And all of this stuff affects Airbnb more than it does a necessity like a long-term rental. So this year has been actually slower for Airbnb earnings, and I think it is because of this macroeconomic environment more than anything else. It's nothing to do with the Airbnb itself. Like, it has really good reviews, people enjoy staying here. It's more about people having tighter budgets in general. The interesting thing is this house actually has the potential to cash flow about $20,000 to $25,000 a year if I rented it out for 6 months of the summer. What I've realized is it brings in the bulk of the money from November to May. It'll usually make around $50,000. And the rest of the year, people are willing to rent for about $4,500 a month. You know, this past year I looked into doing it and there were some people who were interested, but I decided not to because we did get a couple random summer bookings, so we didn't want to cancel on those people. And two, really the bigger reason is I'm just so afraid of getting a squatter. I actually would rather lose a little bit money or break even than end up trying to cash flow but getting a squatter. I just don't think the risk is worth the reward. But there is a strategy in Palm Springs where you can actually make some money. You just rent it out short term during the high season and then you get a 6-month renter. Believe it or not, a lot of people actually were interested and it would have cash flowed, but I don't want to risk it getting a squatter. There's something about it being fully furnished and only being a 6-month rental that makes me feel like it would be more likely to get a squatter for some reason, but I could be wrong here. So is Airbnb worth it in 2025? Well, it really depends on your location and your intentions. Here in Palm Springs, if you're trying to make money, if you're trying to cash flow and get the best return on investment, no, it is not worth it. You're definitely better off keeping your money in stocks or something like that. This is not financial advice, but just historically, as I showed in that other video about stocks versus real estate 5 years later, it would have done better in stocks. However, not everyone is looking for return on investment. For me, this house is still worth it because I use it a lot. I come here all the time. I bring friends and family here, and I essentially get to use it for free. Over time, the house still appreciates in value. And over the last 5 years, we've paid down about $50,000. So that's $50,000 more in equity in the house, just from basically renters paying the monthly mortgage. If your goal is to make the highest return on investment, then no, a Palm Springs Airbnb is not it. But if your goal is to have a second house where most or all of the expenses are covered and you have like a free place to vacation, then it can be worth it. Which, side note, if that's your goal, if you want a second house that you can still Airbnb out so you can cover most or all of the expenses, it is still possible to do that in certain neighborhoods in Palm Springs. Some of them have reached the cap and you can't get a rental permit in that neighborhood anymore, but there are actually still quite a few where you can get a rental permit. I am a real estate agent here in Palm Springs and in LA, so if that is something you're interested in and you want someone to guide you that knows this market, knows what you can rent it out for, just knows contractors and property managers in this area, I'll put my form down below because I'd be happy to guide you through the whole thing. I know this place like the back of my hand. I just like for people to know that realistically, it's probably not going to cash flow a ton of money. If you want a second house and you want to be able to rent it out to cover some of the costs, it is still possible to find that. What I would really urge is don't buy an Airbnb in a place that you never want to visit purely to make money, because then if it doesn't actually do that, you're gonna be pretty annoyed. So while I still think it's worth it for me because myself and my sister use this house a lot, I would not think it's worth it if this was a place that I didn't enjoy visiting. The interesting thing too is there are still Airbnbs out there that do cash flow and do make good money. I have researched this so much. I've interviewed hosts, I've traveled to all these different Airbnbs, and the key is unique stays in remote areas that don't have restrictions. So think things like A-frames, tree houses, geodesic domes in areas where the city doesn't cap the amount of rentals you can do. Those ones are actually doing really well. But if you're looking at just a normal house, turning a normal house into an Airbnb, the days of that are long over. So the truth is, Airbnb is probably less worth it now more than ever, and it really only makes sense if it's a second house and you want to use Airbnb as a way to cover some or all of the expenses. There are a lot of restrictions here. You can't rent your house out as much as you possibly want. It is restricted to 36 different groups, which really limits the amount that you can make on Airbnb. So it's possible that a normal house on Airbnb in a city without these restrictions could do well. But here, it's really only worth it if you're getting the personal enjoyment out of it too. All right, that is gonna be it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed and learned something. Comment down below what you think of this whole thing. I find it fascinating. I mean, I'm hoping more people start booking Airbnbs again, but this is the reality of it. All right, that's it. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.